The old abandoned mansion at the edge of town was always shrouded in mystery and rumor. The locals whispered tales of strange noises, ghostly apparitions, and the unexplained disappearances of those who dared to venture too close. But for a group of thrill-seekers, the stories only fueled their desire to explore the eerie house. One moonlit night, they gathered outside the mansion, armed with flashlights and nerves of steel. The creaking front door swung open with a groan, inviting them into the darkness within. The air was stale, musty, and thick with the scent of decay. As they made their way through the darkened halls, the only sound was the echoing of their footsteps on the hardwood floors. They soon found themselves in a grand ballroom, the walls lined with portraits of long-dead aristocrats. The room was adorned with ornate chandeliers and antique furniture, but it was the grand piano at the center of the room that caught their attention. It was as if it were calling out to them, beckoning them closer. One of the group, a young woman named Rachel, approached the piano tentatively, her fingers grazing the ivory keys. Suddenly, a haunting melody filled the room, the notes floating through the air like the whispers of ghosts. Rachel's eyes widened in terror as she realized that no one in the group was playing the piano. The melody grew louder and more discordant, the keys playing themselves with an otherworldly force. The group backed away in horror, their flashlights flickering and their hearts racing. As they ran from the room, they heard a blood-curdling scream pierce the darkness, followed by a deafening silence. They regrouped outside the mansion, their nerves frayed and their minds reeling. They realized that one of their own, a young man named Jake, was missing. They searched frantically for him, calling out his name in the darkness, but he was nowhere to be found. As the group made their way back to town, they were plagued by nightmares and visions of the horrors they had witnessed. But as the days passed, they could not shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the spirits of the mansion were still with them. One night, Rachel was alone in her apartment, trying to calm her nerves with a cup of tea. She heard a faint tapping at the window, but when she looked outside, there was no one there. She shrugged it off and returned to her tea, but the tapping grew louder and more insistent. Suddenly, a pale face appeared at the window, its eyes wide and empty. Rachel screamed and dropped her mug, shattering it on the floor. When she looked back up, the face was gone, leaving only a faint mist in its wake. The group reconvened, realizing that they needed to face their fears and confront the mansion once more. Armed with cameras and recording equipment, they made their way back to the mansion, determined to uncover the truth behind the horrors they had witnessed. As they entered the ballroom once more, the piano started playing once more, the keys moving on their own. But this time, they did not run. They stood their ground, recording the eerie melody and the unexplainable movements of the piano. Suddenly, Jake appeared before them, his eyes vacant and his movements jerky and unnatural. He approached them slowly, his arms outstretched, his voice a monotone whisper. "Join us," he said. "Join us in eternal darkness." The group backed away, their cameras still rolling, their hearts pounding in their chests. But as they turned to leave, they realized that the doors were locked, trapping them inside the mansion. They were not alone. The spirits of the mansion had claimed them, their bodies and souls now forever trapped within the walls of the haunted mansion. And as the final notes of the haunting melody played out, the group knew that they would never escape the horrors that awaited them within.
It was a typical summer day when the small town of Millfield was hit by a sudden and unexpected storm. The rain came down in sheets, the wind howled through the streets, and lightning flashed across the sky. But the townspeople soon realized that this was no ordinary storm. As the hours passed, the storm showed no signs of letting up. The rain fell harder and harder, flooding the streets and causing power outages throughout the town. But the strangest thing of all was the eerie silence that accompanied the storm. There was no thunder, no sound of raindrops hitting the ground, just a deafening stillness. The residents of Millfield huddled in their homes, waiting for the storm to pass. But as the night wore on, they began to hear strange noises coming from outside. It started with a faint scratching at the windows, but soon escalated to a loud pounding on the doors. One woman, a single mother named Sarah, was alone with her young daughter. She tried to calm her child's fears, but as the pounding grew louder and more insistent, she knew that they were in danger. Suddenly the pounding stopped, replaced by a soft, whispering voice. It was a child's voice, but there was something cold and menacing about it. "Let me in," the voice said. "I'm cold and wet." Sarah's heart raced as she realized that there was no child outside. She knew that something evil was trying to enter her home. She gathered her daughter in her arms and retreated to the safety of the basement. As the storm raged on above them, Sarah and her daughter huddled together in the darkness. But they soon realized that they were not alone. Something was down there with them, something cold and malevolent. They could hear its breathing, its whispering voice, and the sound of its clawed feet scratching against the concrete floor. Sarah's daughter began to cry, her sobs echoing through the basement. Suddenly, the door at the top of the stairs creaked open, and a faint light filtered down into the darkness. Sarah could hear footsteps coming down the stairs, slow and deliberate. She knew that it was not her rescuer, but the thing that was stalking them. In a moment of desperation, Sarah grabbed a nearby shovel and swung it wildly at the figure coming down the stairs. There was a sickening thud, and the figure fell to the ground, motionless. Sarah and her daughter rushed past the fallen figure and out of the house. As they looked back, they saw that the figure was not human at all, but a grotesque creature, its face twisted in a snarl, its eyes glowing with a cold, inhuman light. The storm raged on for 3 more days, but when it finally subsided, the town of Millfield was forever changed. Many of the residents had disappeared, and those who remained were haunted by the memories of the strange storm and the horrors that had accompanied it. Sarah and her daughter left town, never to return, but they knew that the creature they had encountered was still out there, waiting for its next victim. They had survived, but they knew that others may not be as lucky. The storm had brought something evil to Millfield, and it would never be the same again. It was supposed to be a simple hiking trip, a way for 4 friends to reconnect with nature and each other, away from the stress of their daily lives. But as they made their way deeper into the forest, they realized that something was wrong. The trees seemed to shift and move, as if they were alive. The birds were silent, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. But the friends pressed on, their curiosity and determination leading them further into the forest. As the sun began to set, they came across a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood an old cabin, its wooden walls weathered and worn. But it was the strange symbols etched into the walls that caught their attention. They seemed to glow in the fading light, pulsating with an otherworldly energy. Despite their misgivings, the friends entered the cabin, their flashlights casting eerie shadows on the walls. The air was heavy, oppressive, and the symbols seemed to writhe and move as they watched. Suddenly they heard a faint whispering, followed by the sound of footsteps on the wooden floor. They turned to see a figure standing in the doorway, its face obscured by shadows. "Who are you?" one of the friends asked, her voice trembling. The figure stepped forward, revealing its face. It was twisted and grotesque, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. "I am the keeper of this place," it said, its voice echoing through the cabin. "You have trespassed here, and now you must pay the price." The friends tried to run, but the cabin seemed to shift and move around them, trapping them inside. They were surrounded by the symbols, which seemed to glow brighter and brighter, pulsating with an otherworldly energy. As they watched in horror, the symbols began to move, forming a pattern on the floor. The pattern seemed to come alive, writhing and pulsing with an otherworldly energy. Suddenly, the friends were lifted off the ground, their bodies suspended in midair. They could feel a cold, malevolent presence seeping into their minds, filling them with terror. The symbols began to glow brighter and brighter until the light was blinding. And then, there was nothing. When the friends awoke, they were no longer in the cabin. Instead, they found themselves in a dark underground chamber. The walls were lined with strange symbols, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. They tried to escape, but the walls seemed to shift and move around them, trapping them inside. They were surrounded by the symbols, which seemed to writhe and pulsate with an otherworldly energy. As they watched in horror, the symbols began to move, forming a pattern on the floor. The pattern seemed to come alive, writhing and pulsing with an otherworldly energy. Suddenly the friends were lifted off the ground, their bodies suspended in midair. They could feel a cold, malevolent presence seeping into their minds, filling them with terror. The symbols began to glow brighter and brighter until the light was blinding. And then, there was nothing. When the friends awoke again, they were back in the cabin. But something was different. The symbols were gone, and the air was no longer oppressive. The figure that had confronted them was nowhere to be seen. As they made their way out of the forest, the friends realized that they had been changed by their experience. They had witnessed something otherworldly, something that had left a permanent mark on their minds. They knew that they could never forget what they had seen, and that they could never return to the forest again. The cabin and the symbols were gone, but the memories remained, and they knew that they would haunt them for the rest of their lives.